Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christy, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. We are in for another treat today, and I am so excited to have Dr. Jeff Standridge with me. But before we get into all of that, I need you to follow this podcast. Please, please, please. What that does for me is it gets this into the hands of more people because I believe we all need a shot of B12 every once in a while, and today is no exception. So Jeff is here with me. Jeff is kind of cool. He is a soldier, a cyclist, a grandfather of two, an official girl dad. He was also a former vice president, a pilot, and a podcaster. So this guy's done some stuff. We didn't even put professor in there or all the other things that I'm learning about you. But Jeff, welcome to Productive Joy.
It is such a pleasure to be here, Christy. I appreciate you for having me.
I'm excited to have you. And we know that people have a pretty short attention span. As an educator, you know this. So can you convince people to listen just by giving us some sort of nugget of wisdom in the first 30 seconds?
Just a nugget of wisdom in the first 30 seconds. You know, I like to suggest that every one of us has a calling, or every one of us has a purpose or a mission. The reason that we were created, a specific set of giftings. For some of us, our vocation is our calling. So my father-in-law was a pastor. My daughters are nurses. My son-in-law is a physician. They earn their living by fulfilling their calling. As a corporate executive years ago, that wasn't the case for me. I was sure that I wasn't created to sell data to marketers trying to better target their consumers. And so when I figured out the connection between my special giftings and how I earn my living every day, it was a complete and total game changer for me.
Oh, I love that. And I think we are all looking for that, right? Whether we already know that our vocation really is our calling or it is two completely separate things and we don't see the connection. I don't think anybody on the planet wants to just go to work, right? We want to be able to leverage our talents in that space. So I would love to know, did somebody show that to you? Did you figure it out accidentally? Like, how did you determine that the two were indeed related?
Well, so I come to this pursuit from a position of faith, and I was traveling internationally for a large publicly traded company as a senior executive. There were probably 500 people in the organization that rolled up to me across 5 continents, and I kind of had a crisis of calling, and I said, you know, what am I doing here? And so I stepped back and I started looking at feedback that I had received in my prior career as a professor, feedback that I had received in the 20 plus years that I'd spent teaching an adult Sunday school class, for instance, or speaking at the chamber on leadership or other things that I had done. I started looking at where I got joy and energy from work every day. And when I went home, particularly energized, what kinds of things had I spent my time doing that day? And days where I wasn't particularly energized, what kinds of things was I doing? And so it came to the point where I reflected on a conversation that a friend of mine, she and her husband were friends of Lori's and mine, and she said, "Jeff, you're a revealer." And I went, "I'm not sure what that means." And she said, "Well, it doesn't matter if I'm in your Sunday school class and I'm listening to you on Sunday morning, or I listen to you speak at the chamber on leadership, or Mark and I are out with you and Lori for dinner. You say things that provoke and challenge me to think differently about life, work, home, what have you." And so I came to this belief that I was particularly gifted to create new insights that inspire people to better ways of living and working. And when I looked at where I was spending my time at work, it was not, sometimes it was helping them solve work problems. Many times it was talking about parenting, talking about relationships, talking about career, talking about personal finances, solving work problems. But I got joy when someone walked away a little bit more energized because of perhaps the insight, the tool, or the connection that I made for them. And so so I spent the next 8 years in that same company, but working with a completely different attitude because of the connection between that vocation and my calling. I earned my living selling data to marketers, trying to better target their consumers, but I fulfilled my calling by creating new insights for people.
Oh, what powerful thinking had to go into that, right? You really did have to analyze, who am I? And what do I bring to the table? And how can that be used at this particular table? Because I think often we think we have to change everything about
Right.
where we work. And you just said 8 more years worth of doing that in the space you were in instead of feeling like you had to change the space. We've talked a lot with different leaders that I've talked to here on the podcast about just that being in the right seat on the bus, right? But
That's
what I'm
right.
hearing you say is if this is your bus, figure out what your job on this bus is. And you
Mhm.
did a beautiful job of that. Tell me what led to that career because you've had multiple careers based on what I've known about you. You've done a couple things. Thank you for your service, by the way, first and
You're sure.
foremost. So you
Absolutely.
started there, I'm guessing, and then
It's kind of strange. So I grew up in a very rural Arkansas town of 1,200 people. In my public school, there were 28 people in my graduating class.
oh, nice.
And
Okay.
so I joined the Army Reserves at 17. My mother had to sign for me because I wasn't old enough to sign for myself. I went to basic training 7 days after I graduated and got back the night before I started college the next day. And I thought I was going to be a finance. I went to college on a full music scholarship, full ride, instrumental band type music scholarship. Thought I was going to be a finance major until I took an intro to finance and economics and made the only D I've ever made in my life. I then said, well, maybe I'm really good at music and I can be a music major. And so I did that for a couple of semesters until they figured out I wasn't particularly talented. I just worked hard. And so
Yeah.
I was good at one instrument, but I couldn't naturally pick up multiple instruments. Even after taking a semester of violin, I could play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star out of tune. And so I ended up becoming an EMT, emergency medical technician, to pay my way through college and fell in love with the medical field, but really the emergent medical field. I
Okay.
figured out down the road that I didn't have the empathy to be in the healthcare field long term because flew for 9 years on a helicopter team at Arkansas Children's Hospital. I was a street paramedic. Give me your sickest, give me the most critical, the most urgent. Let me get them stabilized and then hand them off to someone else.
Got
And
it.
so after about several years of doing that, I took a professor job at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences, where I was teaching these kinds of things, and I began to really get a glimpse at about 27 or 28 when I was teaching at the university, and then decided to pursue a doctorate in education with an emphasis in leadership, and that led me to a corporate job because of the research I was doing in identifying high performers, and that evolved. I spent 20 years with that publicly traded company. And 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago, I retired from that on my 50th birthday to start my own consulting organization where I can coach and consult entrepreneurs.
Love it. I love the journey because that is actually where the learning happens, right? You thought you
Absolutely.
knew it exactly what you were going to do. I'm going to be a finance major and I'm
Yeah.
going to, make all the money and help other people make the money. And you were like, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that is not for me. I
No,
think
and the interesting thing is I now teach entrepreneurial finance in the college where the only grade I ever received was a D. And it was all on the job. And so I tell people when you read my bio or you look at my resume, it looks like a revolution, but it really was an evolution. It
ooh,
just evolved over time.
I love that. I think we're all really in that evolution phase
Sure.
of I'm good at this, so I'm going to do a little bit more of this, and now
Mhm.
I feel like I'm getting good at that, so I can do a little bit more of that. And you guide people in that space all the time. Oh, power! There's so much power in all that, and I want to go in about 7 different directions, but I got to focus. So I think what is fascinating is that you didn't ever see one step as a stopping point, you saw them as launching pads, right?
That's
So
right.
I want to go back, and this is a completely random question, but I want to know, have you ever done the Clifton Strengths Finder?
I have.
Are you woo? Do you have some
I
woo?
I have a little bit of woo, and that's what I think has made me successful as a salesperson.
Well,
Um,
just what you said a minute ago was about enjoying the emergent
mhm.
sick
Yep.
people, right? Like the people
Mhm.
that right now need my help. And I
Right.
feel like that's a woo thing to do. Woo
Yeah.
stands for winning others over, right? And you
Yep.
need to help them in their moment, but
That's
then you
right.
don't really want to carry them through all of the recovery of the moment. I
Correct.
I also relate to that because I love being that shot of B12. I love being the person who comes in and says, "Here's 2 things you can try right away. Go for it." but I
Mhm.
don't necessarily need to be there for the 7 weeks that it's going to take for that to
Right.
actually implement. I'll come back after the 7 weeks, but
Right.
I was just
Mhm.
curious if maybe you had a little bit of that.
No, yeah, and that's where I spend a lot of my time today is in those kinds of engagements, those one-on-one engagements where that maybe they're a repeat offender and they come back multiple times, but most of them come in and I help them solve where they are, and I may not see them for another 3 months or 5 months or 6 months. Where I spend the majority of my time is with entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and it's funded by third-party sources.
Oh,
So,
nice.
for instance, we have a contract with the state of Arkansas to be the technology commercialization center for the state. And so I spend the vast majority of my time there. And so I went from that vocation supporting my calling to my vocation kind of being my calling. So,
Yeah. So, what advice would you have for a leader right now who is listening to this and going, yeah, Jeff, that's nice, but that's probably not ever going to happen to me because fill in the blank. What advice would you have for somebody who doesn't quite see the opportunity like you did?
well, the first thing I would ask them to do is to assess their level of contentment, happiness, joy. We spend way too much time at work to
Mm.
not do it, to not spend that time doing things that we feel energized and enriched by. Now, don't get me wrong. There are days when I'm not very enriched and energized at work, just like anyone else. But in the sum total, we should get energy from our work because we spend so much time doing it. And the second question I would ask is, what's your life like outside of work because of what happens at work?
Yeah.
And if the answers to those two questions, either of those two questions or both of those two questions, is anything other than net positive, then maybe you need to give some thought to this concept of what's your calling and where does your work or your vocation intersect with your calling.
Wow. I have a lot of friends who are doing jobs because it's what they are good at, what they know how to do, and there are portions of their jobs that they really love, right? Certain things that they're like, I love it when I get to be on the sales side of things, or I love it when I get to onboard a new client because that's, what makes me happy. But the bulk of what they're doing doesn't fit in that space. And I think what you're inspiring people to think about is maybe it does, and you're just not looking at it that way. Or maybe you do need to really assess the space you're in for the skill sets you have. And are you leveraging that the appropriate
Yeah.
way? So it's a perfect segue into my favorite question. This podcast is called Productive Joy. And I think so far, everybody has had a slightly different definition of what they would say productive joy is. So you, Dr. Jeff, what is your definition of productive joy?
I think we've hit on it a little bit, but I would say it is doing the things you love with the people you love, being compensated fairly for that, with time and financial resources for other things that are meaningful to you as well. And so, being impactful in your work, impactful on the organization, impactful on the people, impactful on the general community within which you work, and drawing enjoyment from the vast majority of that. Not all of it necessarily, and not all of it consistently, or not the vast majority of it consistently, but by and large, there's more net positive than there is net negative.
Well, and you actually hit on some very specific things. So, doing the things you love, one,
Mhm,
with the people that you love,
mhm,
and getting compensated appropriately. So, there's a money
mhm.
aspect to that.
Sure.
Being given the time to do it well and making sure the work is meaningful. And I think every one of the things that you just said become exponentially better when they're all five there, right? Like you might
Yeah.
have four of the five and that seems great. But when you can have the magical combination of all five, then all of a sudden you're living your best life. You are in
Yeah.
that space where joy is emergent.
Sure. And we kid ourselves when we say that money's not important. And I follow the words of Zig Ziglar, who said, money's not everything, but it's reasonably close to oxygen. And the fact of the matter is, it takes money to clothe the naked, to feed the hungry, to build schools and hospitals and churches, and
Mhm.
any of the things that are important to you socially. It requires money for that.
Yeah.
And I'm an experienced person, so I've spent pretty much my daughters are 30 and 32, and we spent our money buying experiences versus stuff. So
Yeah.
a family vacation is something that's still very, very important to us. And next week, we're going on a family vacation with 8 adults and 2 grandchildren, right?
Where are you going
And
to go?
we're just going to the Gulf Coast for a few days.
Which part of the Gulf Coast? Like
So generally we go to Perdido Key, Florida, which is the far western part of the Panhandle. But
yes.
there's a particular condo over in Orange Beach that is very kid friendly. And so we're going to Orange Beach this time.
Oh, fun. Well, I am a Floridian, and so I was asking because some people call Texas the Gulf Coast, and I'm like, no, that's different.
Yeah, usually we're in Perdido Key.
Nice.
We like that area a lot.
So the most beautiful beach I think I've ever been to was Rosemary Beach. Now, I live in the Clearwater area, technically Indian Rocks Beach on the west coast of Florida. But yeah, Rosemary Beach was stunning. Just
it is pretty. Been there.
White sand, beautiful clear water, and hills, which we don't get here in the sunny state of Florida. So it's all the things. So I'm hearing from you, you have this gift of helping people understand that joy is a choice and that they actually have a lot more influence over their feeling of that joy than they might realize. And that comes from recognizing your circumstances and then deciding to live in them or fight against them, right? Like there's a little bit of, are you choosing to see the negative or are you choosing to see the positive? Because I believe they're both always there. And the one we choose to focus on is the one we're going to see. So when you work with your clients, is that part of what you do is to help them see the positive in the space that they're already in? Or how does that work? If you were going to consult me,
sure.
How would you help me?
So I start where my client is. And many times, because I'm pretty heavily business focused, many times and more often than not, the problem that they come to me with is a business challenge.
Okay.
A specific business challenge, a temporary setback, a pending failure, something that they don't know how to do, that they've never done before. And so I start there. And it's not uncommon for me to see that, I get a lot of people who come to me looking for career advice, where they say, it's just not doing it for me anymore. I'm just not happy here anymore. And because I come from a position of faith, I have other people who come from a position of faith and they say, I've been praying for an answer about whether I do this job or that job and change careers. And I'm saying, well, what if God doesn't care? And they say, well, of course he cares, but what if your career is not something that he's particularly concerned with? As long as you stay within your calling, as long as you operate to the best of your ability within the giftings that you have, the natural giftings that you have, career may be secondary.
Mm.
Do
people accept that answer, or are they like, I don't like it?
They do. So it depends. Sometimes they do. Most often we have the conversation. They may not accept it at the first because it's kind of a blunt statement, and I do that to kind of get their attention,
Absolutely.
right? But then we come around and have a conversation and a dialogue about it. And another thing I tell them, particularly those who have experienced failure and is ready to throw up their hands, and I say, failure's only failure if you quit.
Ooh.
Otherwise it's just feedback, right? If I quit, then that temporary setback has become a permanent failure. If I don't quit and I take what I learned to adapt my approach, adapt my style, to think a little more about what I did wrong and what I could do right, then it's merely just a learning experience on the road to an eventual success.
Gosh, those are strong words, sir, and really important ones. I think that I can think about my own kids. Actually, we just turned all of our home videos. My husband and I just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And as a gift, thank you. As a gift, he took all of our VHS tapes and turned them into digital. And we watched our kid's first birthday just this last night with the whole family. And my daughter walked a full month after my son. They're twins. Jackson, the first time he walked, he took a step, it fell. Second time he walked, he took a couple steps, fell. Chloe didn't walk for a full month later, but when she did walk across the room. Now, the video that he saw, he's like, she's only taking a couple steps. I said, yes, but the first time she walked, which is not on this video, she did walk all the way across the room. I say that because to this day, they still operate in that space a little bit where they're afraid to fail. Chloe is afraid to fail for fear of not appearing like she understands something. I think Jackson is more willing to try, but once he does fail at something, he holds back hard and he is very unwilling to do it again. right? But what I just heard you say is that failure is just information, right? And it's
It is.
only failure if you quit.
Mhm.
And so, Jackson and Chloe, if you're listening to this, understand that the only way that anything that you do is failure is if you decide never to do it again and not to learn from what you're doing. I think that that's a lesson we all need, in a reminder maybe that we all need, that you didn't fail anything unless you stopped doing it. You just
Yeah,
learn no
yeah.
things from that information.
Now, you might choose to stop for very valid reasons that, you know what, this is not who I am. I'm never, if I could go out and try to be an NFL football player, I could start tomorrow and I could fail and fail and fail and fail and fail. And I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to be that. Right. So maybe cognitively, I need to assess the situation and make
An
a more
informed
rational
decision.
decision, an informed, rational decision, right?
Well, like
But
you playing the
if I,
violin, right? You don't play the
yeah,
violin anymore because that was not your gifting. But I think the difference is when you're trying to do something that is going to make you better, but you're not good at it the first time, it's okay. And that's what I
that's right.
appreciate about what she said. I happen to know it takes 18 times of trying something in front of others to master it. But we frequently say, oh my gosh, I did that once. It was a train wreck. I'll never do it again.
Yeah,
And
sure.
what I'm hearing you say is you coach people to recognize, no, you got to do it a couple times and you got to
That's right.
give it your best effort more than once.
Muscle memory. That's
Yeah,
exactly right. That's
for
exactly right.
sure. So, Dr. Jeff, you are, first of all, a gift. You're just such a delightful human being. And it's clear to me that you have put in the work so that you can help others. I would love for the people who are listening to this to know how to find you. What's the best way for them to get coached by a master?
Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn, Jeff Standridge on LinkedIn. They can find me at .com. And I'm also, where I spend the vast majority of my time is on a company called Innovation Junkie. And so that's Jeff S at innovationjunkie.com.
Tell us a
But
little bit about Innovation Junkie. I
sure.
had some fun going down that rabbit hole.
Sure. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, where I spend most of my time is with the funded coaching work that we do through an organization called Conductor. And it's a public-private partnership. It's a for-profit company, but partnered with public entities to actually fund the work. And you have to be an Arkansas-based company within a certain revenue range in order to meet the qualifications for the funded support. Well, we started having a number of companies all around the world, divisions of large corporations, like the largest corporations in the world, companies of 20 to 50 to $250 million, coming and saying, we love the work you're doing. We need some of the same kind of work, but we know we don't qualify for the funded services. So we created Innovation Junkie to protect the business model of the purely for-profit versus the for-profit social enterprise, right? And that's the way Innovation Junkie came about. So I work with CEOs. Usually I'm either hired by the CEO and his or her executive team, or by the board, or by key investors of that organization, like a private equity group or what have you, to come in and help them analyze what's standing in the way of them generating sustained strategic growth for the organization, and help them innovate, to really challenge the status quo, to plan for and execute against a strategic growth plan and a strategic growth strategy. In doing so, I often observe nuances in their culture, nuances in their leadership styles, deficits in their culture and leadership styles. And so I have what I call the culture of excellence that I'm constantly observing for and helping executive teams to remediate gaps in along the way.
Well, that culture of excellence is so important, right? Because I think that culture is what you allow. And we have to
It
be
is.
thoughtful about what we're creating with our intentions and our unintentional actions, right? What are the unintended outcomes of the way that I talked to that person, or the way that I reacted to that mistake, or the way that I handled myself in that meeting? Those
Mhm.
are all creating culture too. And
They
so
are.
how do
All of
you do
those
that
things,
well?
all of those things are culture, right? That we
100%.
tend to think that they're the nice, good-looking core values that we have graphically cleaned up and put on a banner and stuck on the wall. Well, that's part of our espoused culture. That's part of the culture we say we have.
Right.
But then there's the culture in use, and many times those are few and far between. And so really understanding that culture is everything that goes on. It's how I feel as an employee when I walk in. It's how I feel when I walk out. It's how we approach decision making. It's whether we're process oriented or not process oriented. It's whether we put core values on the wall and live by them, or we allow breaches and lapses in core value with no recompense or no consequences.
Right.
All of those things constitute our culture.
Well, you're the kind of guy that I hope that all of my listeners will reach out to, because you get it, right? You get it in a way that is repeatable and sustainable and something that you can help others attain, which is awesome. So I could talk to you all day, but I can't talk to you all day. So are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Let's do it. Can't wait.
Okay. So this is my favorite part because I love to hear where people go with this. So, sir, what is your definition of fun?
My definition of fun is hanging out with my family. So they all came over impromptu Saturday evening for burgers around the pool and swimming with the grandkids, or well, the grandchild. One of them's too young to swim. And this weekend we have a lake place about, I don't know, an hour north of here, and they're all talking about going there, and that's who we're going on vacation with next week. And so the fact that my adult children at least make me feel as though they love spending time with us is my definition of fun.
That is it. That is a win right there for sure. And you said you have 2 sweet grandbabies. Give them a shout out. One is almost 2 and one is 8 weeks. Is that right?
Beatty Catherine will be 2 July the 29th, and Ruby Caroline is 8 weeks old today.
Oh my gosh, what great names. And those are from separate daughters. So
No, they're actually from the same daughter.
They're from the same daughter. Okay. So you've got
Yep.
one that has 2 kids and one that doesn't have any children.
That's right. So far.
Got it. So far. Okay. Jeff, how do you know that you are showing up as your authentic self?
Well, I break a little glass every now and then, and sometimes I have to have people give me feedback that I've
That's
broken
fair.
that glass. You know, I say that success comes because of everyone's ability to balance results and relationships. If we
Oh,
focus on results at the expense of relationships, we'll be wildly successful very, very quickly until we alienate everyone around us who's responsible for helping us maintain those results, and then we lose them both. By the same token, if we focus on relationships at the expense of results, people will love us until they lose respect for us because we can't deliver results when we say we're going to deliver them. And so I am a results guy by natural inclination and tendency. I do love relationships, but sometimes I can let the tightrope get imbalanced over on the results side, and I need people around me to hold me accountable.
we all do. Nobody can be good at everything. And so
Right.
the most important thing we can do is have the right teammates around us that balance out our parts that we're not as gifted in. We can't do it all. Okay. How do you channel your best self on your worst days?
Ooh, best self on my worst days. Well, this is probably TMI, but I spent all morning yesterday morning in the ER with kidney stones.
Oh, Lord, that's not TMI. That's miserable. I'm so sorry.
Well, and so, you know, my point in that is that there's never a day where we feel, there's never a week where every day in the week we feel 100%.
Right.
Right. And I am convinced of the connection between mind and body. And it is hard to be your best self when what's going on between your ears is amiss.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to get in my right mind so I can be in my right and best self, if that makes sense. And,
It makes
sometimes
total
that
sense.
means, you know, suck it up, buttercup. We got work to do, or we've got good to do, or we've got impact to make. And that's how I mean by that.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so last question, and this is going to be a tough one because you've said some pretty great things. But if people can only remember one thing from all of the great wisdom that you have dropped on us today, what's the one thing that you really want people to walk away with today?
That 2 things. I got to go back to the failure's only failure if you quit. That's a big one, because so many people are completely incapacitated by setback.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no need to be incapacitated. Step back, look at where it went wrong, own it if it was a personal choice, and chart the course forward to go a different direction. And it's never too late to start really assessing what your purpose and calling is.
Mm. You have done a beautiful job today of giving us just a little glimpse into you. And I'm so grateful that you chose to share that with the Productive Joy community. You are clearly gifted, sir, in all things, not just learning, but learning in a way that can be practical and useful for the leaders around you. So well done. Well done.
Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate your podcast, and having listened to several episodes, I'm blown away by the message you're delivering and the impact that you're having. And so thank you for that. It's really refreshing.
Thank you. Well, honestly, I think that joy is a choice and that every single day there is good and bad. And the one we choose to focus on is the one we're going to see. So, friends, if you're listening, thank you for sticking with us today. And we are so grateful that you chose to spend the last 30 minutes with us. And Dr. Jeff took us to school and he did a beautiful job with it. And I'm hopeful that you will continue to learn from him and go find him on all of his socials. We'll put those in the show notes. And the biggest thing that I just really hope that you will all remember is that the goal of this podcast is for you to figure out a way to turn fun into action.